All right, get ready to explore because today we are diving deep into the world of Assamese. And I gotta say, the second I saw classical language, I was intrigued. What does a language have to do to earn a title like that? It sounds kind of exclusive.
It really is a bit of a select group. In India, for a language to even be in the running, you're talking centuries of history, a whole treasure trove of literature that stands on its own, not just like a spin-off of something else. It's the linguistic equivalent of ancient Rome, not some trendy new slang.
Okay, so Assamese must have some serious stories to tell. Give us the historical rundown. What's the backstory here?
All right, so picture this.
Yeah.
Ancient India, a family of languages, we call them Indo-Aryan, is spreading its influence. And within that family, you've got these dialects evolving from what linguists call Magadhi Prakrit. Think of it like the grandparent language to a bunch of modern Indian languages. Though there is some debate about just how close it is to Assamese.
Yeah.
You know how family reunions can be.
Oh, tell me about it. And my family only speaks one language. But it wasn't just this Indo-Aryan influence setting up shop, right? Northeast India already had a whole linguistic scene going on.
Absolutely. We're talking a melting pot of languages. You had Tibeto-Burman languages, Austroasiatic languages, imagine like a bustling marketplace, everyone speaking different languages. And that whole mix, it played a huge role in shaping Assamese into what it is today.
It's like those dishes that blend flavors from different cultures. You get those hints of each influence, but it all comes together to make something totally new and amazing.
No, that's a delicious analogy.
Yeah.
And you can practically trace these influences through time. Like some scholars think Assamese might even have what we call an Austroasiatic substrate.
Yeah.
Imagine the foundation of a house. Even if you build something new on top, that original structure, it still kind of influences the shape of what comes after. So in this case, it suggests that the way Assamese puts sentences together, its very syntax, might be subtly shaped by these earlier languages.
Wow, linguistic echoes from the past. So you're saying remnants of languages that haven't been spoken in that region for centuries could be influencing how Assamese works today. That's incredible. It's like linguistic archaeology. But where do we even begin to uncover evidence of that kind of thing?
Well, for a taste of really early Assamese, we can look at these fascinating Buddhist verses called the Charyapada. Think of them like postcards from the 9th century, giving us a glimpse into what the language, looked and sounded like way back then. And what's really cool is that they share similarities with other languages in the region like Bengali and Odia. It's like a family reunion. Seeing those shared features and how each language took those building blocks and ran with them.
Okay, so we've got these early glimpses, but when did Assamese really step onto the stage, with its own spotlight? When did it have its big debut?
A key moment was the rise of the Kamada kingdom around the 13th century. Their court, it became this hub for a distinctly Assamese literary tradition to really blossom. Think like royal sponsorship, beautiful manuscripts, the whole 9 yards. And one of the earliest examples we have is this poem called Prahlada Karita, written by Hema Sarasvati.
So just like that, a kingdom throws its weight behind a language and it shapes its whole trajectory. That's power. Were there any other big players in this linguistic drama?
Absolutely. Let's fast forward to the 14th century. A poet named Madhav Kandali takes on this massive project, translating the epic Ramayana into Assamese. We're talking the story that's woven into the very fabric of Indian culture. To have it accessible in their own language, that must have been huge.
Oh, I can only imagine. It'd be like someone translating the entire Lord of the Rings saga into, Klingon or Dothraki. It's not just about understanding the story anymore. It's about elevating the language itself, proving it can handle these complex narratives.
You hit the nail on the head. But, it gets even more interesting in the 15th century. That's when a figure named Sankardev enters the scene. He was a true game changer, let me tell you.
Wait, any relation to the philosopher Adi Shankaracharya? Those two sound like they'd be at the same family reunion we were talking about.
Well, their names are certainly similar, but they come from very different branches of history.
Yeah.
But like Shankaracharya, this Sankardev, his impact was massive. He led this whole cultural and religious movement that really breathed new life into the Assamese language.
A one-man linguistic renaissance. Okay, I'm hooked. How'd he pull that off?
Well, he was prolific, for one, translating tons of texts, but he infused them with his own unique style. He even created entirely new forms of literature, like Borjeets, these are devotional songs, and Ankiya Nat, which are these vibrant one-act plays. Imagine the impact, not just on literature, but on music and theater, too.
It's like Shakespeare's influence on English. Sure, he wrote some brilliant plays, but he also, coined words, shaped phrases. He basically gave the English language a whole new toolbox.
Now, that's a fantastic comparison. And just like Shakespeare, Sankardev's influence is still felt today. It's through these incredible figures that we see how languages are shaped not just by geography or politics, but by individual passion and artistry.
Wow, talk about a legacy. So far, we've uncovered this amazing blend of ancient roots, cultural crossroads, even a little royal drama. But we've only just scratched the surface of what makes Assamese so fascinating, haven't we?
You read my mind. Next up, let's tune our ears to the sonic world of Assamese. Because its sounds, they tell their own captivating story.
All right, you mentioned the sounds of Assamese, and now I'm really curious, because it's not like we have recordings of people speaking from centuries ago. So how do we know how those ancient sounds echo in the Assamese spoken today?
Well, it's a bit like detective work, right? You have to piece together clues from the way people speak the language now. Let's take retroflex consonants as an example.
Hit me with a refresher. Those are the sounds that make non-native speakers twist their tongues up in knots, right?
Exactly. Think of like the T sound in Hindi or in Marathi. Your tongue curls back toward the roof of your mouth. And a lot of the Indo-Aryan languages in that region, they have those sounds. But Assamese, well, it kind of decided to go a different route for the most part.
Get out. That's like showing up to a family reunion where everyone's got the same nose and you've got something completely different going on. What happened there? Did they just like ditch those sounds altogether?
It's more nuanced than that. Remember those other language families we talked about?
Yeah.
Like the Tibeto-Burman languages? They were the cool kids on the block first, so to speak, and Assamese may have picked up some of their stylistic choices. It's like how fashion trends spread sometimes. You just can't resist trying something new, right?
I hear that. So instead of those retroflex sounds, what does Assamese have up its sleeve? What did they swap in?
Well, one good example is this great K sound, written as X in the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is always a mouthful. You hear it in words like kar, meaning spicy, or sokalu, meaning all.
Okay, those are definitely not sounds I'm used to hearing every day. I can already imagine myself trying to wrap my tongue around those words.
Oh, it takes practice for sure. But the point is, those distinct sounds, they really paint a picture of a language that was shaped by this whole mix of influences. Like looking at a tapestry and you see threads from all these different cultures, all woven together.
I love that. So we've got these unique consonant sounds, but what about the vowels? Don't tell me they've got some crazy vowel thing going on too.
Oh, absolutely. Assamese has this impressive array of vowel sounds, especially when it comes to what we call backgrounded vowels. So imagine saying O, but with 4 slightly different lip shapes. Assamese has a specific sound for each one.
Wait, 4 different sounds. I can barely handle the one we have. I feel like my ears need subtitles just to keep up. Does that actually change the meaning of words, or is that one of those things that only linguistics nerds are going to pick up on?
Oh, no, it makes a huge difference. Just like we use, in English to express different things, those subtle shifts in how you say that O sound, it can completely change the meaning of a word in Assamese. It's like having the secret code embedded in the vowels.
This is blowing my mind. So we've got the consonants, we've got the vowels, we've got a secret vowel code. What else is there to this language? What about grammar? Does it have any fun tricks up its sleeve?
You bet it does. And this is where those classifiers that we mentioned earlier come in. These little words that can tell you a lot about a culture's worldview, actually.
All right, classifiers. I'm all ears. What makes them so special?
Imagine this. You're describing a group of people in Assamese. You can't just say, like, 3 people. You actually need to use a specific classifier depending on if they're men, women, or a mixed group. These classifiers, they categorize nouns based on their shape, their size, even their cultural importance.
So it's not just about being grammatically correct, it's about social cues, too.
Exactly. So, for example, using the classifier zon for an adult male shows respect. Gorky can be used to show respect to men or women. Get the wrong one? Well, that's like accidentally calling someone dude in a super formal setting. Awkward. It's these little nuances that make language so fascinating.
Okay, that's so cool. Classifiers aren't just about like organizing nouns. They're a window into how Assamese speakers see the world, how they perceive differences, how they show respect. It's like each classifier holds this tiny little bit of cultural knowledge.
Exactly. They really add this depth and richness to the language. It reflects a worldview that's really intertwined with social dynamics and cultural understanding.
It's incredible. I'm realizing that even the smallest details in a language can reveal so much about a culture. It's like every word has its own story to tell.
Like a linguistic treasure hunt, right.
Yeah.
And speaking of treasures, we haven't even touched upon the amazing diversity within Assamese itself, the many dialects that add their own unique flavors to this already fascinating language.
Wait, are we talking regional accents here, or are these dialects totally different beasts altogether? Okay, so tell me more about these dialects. Are they like totally different languages or more like distant cousins?
Think of it this way. Assamese is like the main family, right? And then you've got like four big branches of dialects: Eastern, Central, Kamrupi, and Golpuria, each one named after the region where they're mostly spoken.
So someone from like Eastern Assam might use different words or phrases than someone from the Golpara region.
Mhm.
How easy is it to spot the differences?
Yeah, sometimes it's as subtle as a little change in pronunciation, kind of like how people in different parts of the US might say caramel differently. But sometimes the differences are way more obvious. It's what makes studying dialects so cool. You can kind of trace how people moved around and how ideas spread just by listening to how they talk.
That's amazing. So each dialect carries its own little piece of local history. You mentioned something about non-regional variations too, right? Now that sounds even more interesting. What are those about?
So these non-regional variations, they're fascinating because they pop up based on the social situation, not just where you're from. Like one example is the Bakatia dialect. It's got a lot of influence from the religious language used in monasteries called satras.
Okay, monasteries. Now this is my kind of history lesson. So are we talking like ancient rituals here, secret texts? What's the deal with Pakatia?
Less about secret rituals and more about the tone. Imagine the most polite, respectful way of speaking you can think of and then like take it up a notch. That's kind of Pakatia. Lots of indirect and passive ways of saying things. It's almost like a linguistic silk glove.
So it's like having a whole other level of formality built right into the language. Do the people ever break character, or is it like super serious business all the time?
Actually, some of the ways that they phrase things in Pakatia, those indirect expressions, you'll hear them in standard Assamese too, but only in really, really formal situations.
I love that. It's like the linguistic equivalent of, I don't know, breaking out the fine china for a special occasion. You also mentioned coded languages earlier. Now, those sound really secretive. Were people speaking in riddles or something?
Not quite riddles, but there were certain communities, like some groups of astrologers, who would use a coded dialect called Thar. It was their way of keeping their conversations private, making sure only the people who were supposed to understand could.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be useful, especially if you're talking about predictions and stuff. Like a linguistic secret handshake. Only those in the know and all that. So we've covered the history, the sounds, the grammar, even secret dialects. But what about the heart and soul of a language? The literature.
Assamese literature is truly a treasure. From like the ancient times to today, the language has been used to tell stories, share wisdom, explore what it means to be human. And we've already touched upon those incredible Charyapada poems, those windows into early Assamese from over 1,000 years ago.
It's mind-blowing to think about people writing poetry in this language all those centuries ago. What other kinds of literary gems are out there?
Well, in the 14th century, you have Madhav Kandali. He takes on the Saptakanda Ramayana. Can you imagine translating one of the most important epics in Indian literature into a language that's still like finding its feet? Talk about pressure.
Wow, what a legacy. It's like building a monument out of words. What about other kinds of writing besides epics? What else were people into?
Then in the 16th and 17th centuries, you see this surge in Vaishnavite literature, all inspired by that religious and cultural movement we were talking about before. So you've got devotional poetry, philosophical stuff, and those captivating Ankianat plays we mentioned earlier, they really flourished during this time.
So it sounds like Assamese literature was always growing and changing, reflecting what was going on in the culture.
Yeah, exactly. And that evolution never stopped. As Assamese society kept changing, so did its literature, taking on new forms, exploring new ideas. By the late 19th century, you start to see more modern styles of writing emerge, reflecting the changing times. It's a new era, a new generation finding their voice.
From those ancient Buddhist poems to modern-day writing, it seems like Assamese has something for everyone. I gotta say, this whole deep dive has been incredible. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
That's the best part. Every layer we peel back, there's something new and amazing to discover. And honestly, this is just the beginning. There's a whole world of Assamese music, film, poetry out there waiting to be explored.
You've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about and hopefully a lot to go out and explore. And that classical language designation, it's not just about preserving the past, it's about recognizing how vibrant and full of potential Assamese is for the future. Who knows what incredible stories are still waiting to be told. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey, and to all our listeners, we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.